Good morning. How are we doing? Wow, that was really inspiring. I know that this is the first session of the day. You're probably just coming out of a breakfast or a coffee, or maybe a workout, but really excited to have you. My name is Vince Minjares. I am a program manager with the Aspen Institute. I lead our coaching, school sports, and athlete health, safety, development. You could probably say a little bit of like many different things. And I'm really excited for this session. I'm excited to be here. This is a personal coming full circle. I did my graduate study at Berkeley about 12 years ago, and that was my sort of early introduction to research on coach and athlete development, which is really what I'm passionate about. And this conversation this morning is, I think, a marriage of a few different things. It's very much a marriage of youth sports, athlete development, positive youth development, physical activity, from a research application perspective. So what our plan for you today is, we're obviously going to talk about competition design. We're going to talk about competition design in youth sports that really hits on the various goals that we have. One of the things about it is that there's always multiple goals in youth sports. And this conversation is going to really dive into it with some experts. I'm going to set the scene with a little, very short slide presentation, and then I'll invite our amazing panelists to come up. They'll introduce themselves, and then we'll get into our conversation. I will say that periodically we'll ask some questions, or we'll invite you to ask some questions. Let's just be mindful there is a microphone running around, so we don't want our mic runner to be crazy, but we also want to make sure we give you an opportunity to share thoughts and feedback. So with that being said, I'm going to dive into a few things to sort of ground our conversation today. The first thing, raise your hand if you're familiar with the American Development Model. Awesome. Raise your hand if you're not familiar with it. You've never heard of it? Okay, nice. That's awesome. Okay, so for those who don't know, ADM is a framework based on long-term athlete development. It was really pioneered by USA Hockey. USOPC really formally adopted it in 2014 and now works actively with national governing bodies in particular to construct their own versions of it. It's really a framework for thinking about long-term athlete development, which is a key. The long-term is extremely important piece of this conversation, which is that when you want to develop athletes in the long term, you have to develop kids who love the sport in the short term and have a great experience. So what does it really mean in practice? And there's a couple things to know. One is that there's a few specific things that ADM really cares about. Yes, since the USOPC and the national governing bodies care about elite athlete development, Olympic athletes, that is part of the goal. But it's not done this is proposed to be done in a way that does not sacrifice everybody. It actually includes everybody. One of the things is we want to get the talent pool, the kids playing sport, as wide as possible. If we get as many kids playing sport who love it and are developing sport and general athleticism and positive youth development skills, then we are in a great situation for people who could become athletes and who long-term, but who also just love sport and keep playing. And there's lots of different pathways in between. I think the thing about the framework is what we often see as a staged-based approach, where you're developing foundations that then progress into helping you sort of specify later on. I think that the thing that often is maybe forgotten in conversations about ADM, because we tend to think of it as this like stage-based model of, there's a discovery stage, and then you work through a development stage, and then a training compete stage, is that there are actually these core 5 principles that really underpin everything. And, universal access, developmentally appropriate activities, multi-sport participation, fun, engaging atmosphere. For our purposes today, right? So if you were to say, how do we implement long-term athlete development, or the ADM? How do we implement this in practice? Number 2 and number 4 are what we're thinking about today. How do we design developmentally appropriate activities that are focused on foundations, physical literacy, fundamental movement skills, in a fun, engaging, and progressively challenging atmosphere? That's a really good challenge of youth sports. That's a really good problem to try to take on. And what we can say is that simply having kids do adult versions of the sport is not the way. It's just not. So we have to construct versions for kids and young emerging athletes that meet them where they are. And that means a lot of different things depending on context. So what we are proposing and have grounded today in is this concept called, sorry, this was the question. Yep, skip my slide. We are proposing a concept called competitive engineering. And competitive engineering comes from the research. There's a seminal paper from 2011. Damon Burton is the lead author. This is the process of modifying the competitive environment by changing structures, rules, facilities, and equipment to enhance the outcomes we want, right? So we want kids to be physically active. We want them to love the sport. We want them to develop foundational skills. And yes, we want them to develop sport-specific skills as well. It's done through, we're looking at this through the prism of these four kind of constructs: structure, rules, facilities, and equipment. I will say that one of the core things you'll see in any competitive engineering approach is a focus on athlete involvement. How do we do a better job of making sure that when kids are actually there, we've done the hard thing of getting them there. How do we actually construct environments that kids get to be involved in? And we're not, in this particular conversation today, we are not talking about practice. We are talking about the game. We are talking about the competition, the tournament, the league. This is a question for administrators, probably more than coaches. If you are designing a league or a tournament or a program, this is your responsibility to figure out for implementation. The last thing I will say is, just as a way of thinking, what does this mean? Here are some examples of the kinds of things we're talking about. From a structure perspective, it's your selection process, maybe your age guidelines, maybe you have standings. Rules are things like scoring systems, substitution rules, offensive and defensive restrictions, timeouts. Facilities are things like field dimensions, the height of the target, the size of the goal, the safety of the equipment. Obviously, from an equipment perspective, ball size, compression of the ball, the use of equipment, of protective gear. So does that make sense? Please nod your head if that makes sense. All right, cool. So that's our setup for today. Let's see, how long did that take me? 7 minutes. Excellent. Very happy with that. I'd like to welcome my panelists, and because we're going to dive into it, or my panels. So why don't you guys come up now? Let's give them a round of applause. We need one here. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I'm gonna leave that one up. Okay. I'm gonna invite everyone to just introduce themselves. André, why don't you start?
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is André. Currently I'm the Senior Director, Casting and Human Performance with Cirque du Soleil. How many of you have seen the show before? Aha, some of you have been to Vegas probably. I come from sport. Prior to Cirque, I was working for the Canadian Baseball Federation for about 20 years. So you can ask me after the question that I've been asked all the time, okay, like baseball to Cirque, really? So you can ask me that after if you have time. And I coach a national team for 15 of those 20 years. Along the way, I've done consultation also for many organizations, but mainly Scandinavian countries, Olympic committees, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland. And I've also taught at the University of Ottawa for also about 20 years. So this is about me.
Hi, my name is Eloisa Tejero, and I'm a board member of San Francisco Youth Soccer. It's the recreational league and competitive league in San Francisco that serves 6,000 children. It's a grade-based program for our recreational league, and all three of my children have participated in play at SFU Soccer before moving on to playing NorCal, which is the competitive league here in the Bay Area. I'm a volunteer, team manager, volunteer coach in the past before moving on to my day job of having worked with different nonprofit sports organizations. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Karin Pfeiffer, professor in kinesiology, and in my third year as director of the Institute for the Study of Youth Sports at Michigan State. Prior to becoming the Institute director, my work really focused on how we assess physical activity and interventions to increase physical activity in children and adolescents. So naturally, sport is a fabulous vehicle through which we can increase physical activity. But that also gives me a perspective about more of a long-term health kind of a framework, and positions me quite solidly in the ADM kind of framework. And one of the things that, as Vince was talking, it just reminded me, our institute was founded in 1978, and we actually had like the landmark study. Our state legislature funded us through a line item in the budget directly from the state of Michigan, and the legislators were concerned about safety in youth sports all the way back then, and commissioned us to conduct a study about why children were participating in sport. And back then, the top reasons were to have fun, to be with friends, and then some of the reasons were definitely competition and a few other things like that. But studies have replicated that moving forward, and pretty much those reasons have stayed the same. And so I guess I want to remind all of us about that as we're having this conversation today. Why are we here and what are we doing? We want the kids to have fun so that they continue along and play for a lifetime.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kyle Albrecht, Vice President and General Manager of MLS Next and MLS Go, Major League Soccer's two youth platforms. So those two programs that I oversee back at MLS HQ, based at kind of the two very different levels of the youth soccer landscape. So at the elite level, we've got MLS Next. That program was founded in 2020 after the conclusion of the Development Academy, where MLS really picked up at the elite end of youth soccer with the highest level of what we would consider elite youth soccer development. MLS Go, a little bit younger in terms of the time that it's been around, launched in 2023. It's the league's recreational youth platform, so different than what we would say, obviously, at the elite end in terms of trying to produce players to reach their highest potential and potentially go to the professional level of the national teams in MLS Next. With MLS Go, very focused, as what Karin just said, in terms of more of the areas of how do we keep kids in the game for longer, really through making sure that they have a great time, they learn something, and that they want to come back for another season. So those are the two platforms that the league oversees in the youth space.
It's a great panel. I'm just really excited to have this conversation. And I think one of the things that we love about the conversation will be, can we find really pragmatic actions that organizations can take that hit on multiple objectives? And I think that is entirely possible, particularly in the way we design the structures that kids are participating in the play itself. That's why I'm so excited about this. I'm like really thankful that Tom finally let me do a competitive engineering panel, because I'm like, this is the one we want to do. Okay, we're gonna get into it. André, I want you to kick us off. You've done a lot of work internationally. You think a lot about the confidence of certainly athletes and performers and young people. You think a lot about sport development. Can you just get this conversation going in terms of how do you think about this? What are some examples that you would like to share with the group in this space?
Thank you. Let me start with this premise. There is a constant wherever I go, wherever I traveled before, around the competition system, is that coaches will always coach to the competition system. Wherever you go, it's always the same thing, all right? So we teach to the test, but the question is, can we make the test better? And for us, the test is a competition system. So the concept of what I like to call meaningful competition has emerged from the ancestor of the ADM, which is LTAD, that we started in Canada like years ago, I believe 2004, 2005. And we started looking at the competition system and how we can make it better to create, like you mentioned, more confidence, and to also look at the three pillars of physical literacy. As a reminder, skills, competencies is one of the pillars. confidence is the other one, and those two together will drive motivation that will also continue with the active participation in sport. So if we focus solely on the competencies, on the skills, and we're missing the confidence part, we're dropping the ball. So that said, with everything that we do, how can we make, I'll give you a quick example because you want me to be pragmatic. Imagine little Rosie, let's say she's 10, and she does gymnastics, but more specifically, she does trampoline, right? So the coach has been working with little Rosie for quite a bit, and then comes her first competition. She gets on the trampoline, there's like 5 judges, and she starts, boom, and she does her things, and unfortunately, she makes a mistake, she falls. And then the judges started to make correction and deduct points and everything. Is that good for confidence? Probably not. Any of you playing golf? You know what the mulligan is? So when you're as bad as me as golf, we love the mulligan. So the mulligan basically is you can replay like a shot without being penalized. So we have the mulligan in gymnastics now. So coach can say mulligan, and little Rosie can repeat a routine with a little bit more confidence. So those are the little things that we're trying to do, and I have so many examples of other things also that I can share later on.
Who calls the mulligan? Is it the coach or
the coach?
The coach does. And how many mulligans do they get?
You can decide based on the different clubs. I've seen 1 and 2, mainly during the course of the competition. So you can decide. You can make your own little test to see what's appropriate.
And who is it a rule that is being adopted by a governing body or the organizer of the competition, like at a?
No, it started at the, like for us, like what you call your state. We have provinces, so at the provincial level, this is where it's being implemented.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really, really good example, and it's a question because I think we've seen this a lot. I think about track and field as a sport that sort of simply adopts the race. You show up, you run the race, right? And that's great for some folks who win the race, but is that how the structure should be? I don't know.
And you mentioned track. In Norway, they're piloting right now, hurdles. Let's say you have 10 hurdles, but as a participant, you can decide the distance between them. If you're taller, shorter, and you can just adapt the way you want. You want to put like 10 like in short distance and sprint after, go for it. But you can decide exactly what you want to do. So it goes back to your question about ask kids what they want, one of your key pillars. So why don't we ask kids what they want and let them experience the different things also. I've seen in swimming also, same thing in Norway again, time races. So at the starting line, you can have a 72-year-old, you can have a 10-year-old, you can have men and women, all kinds of different skills. But the thing is, before you start, you need to announce your time, your finishing time. So I go and I say, I'm going to do it in a minute. Vince, struggling a bit, is going to do it in minute 30 maybe. But there's no clock, and that way you can learn how to pace yourself. And the winner is the one that comes to the end the closest to the target time that they've identified at the beginning. So those are the little tweaks we could do to competition in order to make it more meaningful and to also embrace and increase confidence.
My only other question, one of the things you've also talked about is scoring systems. And I know you have maybe a controversial idea a little bit about scoring systems, but just throw it out there and we'll just let people react.
Well, my thought has always been like, if you look at baseball, hockey, soccer, whatever sport, and you look at the professional athletes, the way they score the game, right? If you're looking at hockey, it's the number of times the pucks enter the net that determines a winner or a loser. But we, as adults, decided that this was the appropriate scoring system for kids. Why don't we change it? Why don't we actually like look at alternative? I'll give you an example. In Sweden, it was years ago with the Swedish Hockey Federation, and they said like on our teams there's always someone who is dominating, the bigger kid because he went to puberty earlier and everything, and he's dominating, scoring all the goals. So we look at the scoring system and we look at how we could change it, and they've looked at this system where if Vince is the stud player, big player on the team, he scores all the goal, and he scores the first goal, So that's 1 point for the team. If he scored a second goal, that's another point for the team. But if the second goal is scored by her, then their point value is double. If the third goal is scored by her, then it's triple. So when I go back to my premise at the beginning, coaches of the competition system, what's the coach going to do with Vince at practice? He's going to teach him how to pass the puck, because it's going to have an impact on winning or losing the game. So changing the scoring system will have some benefits for sure.
Panel, what do you think? What do you think about some of these rule suggestions, the mulligan, the scoring system? What does it make you think about?
I think it's a great idea. At the beginning, you noted that you quoted the paper about competitive engineering from 2011. I think that's when that term kind of was coined, but the work and research in that field had been happening for quite some time before that. And so a lot of you might be familiar with how youth play with a smaller size basketball, for example, and a shorter rim, right? These notions have been around for a long time, and it's all about how creative we want to be. And I 100% agree with André that asking the children, what would make this more fun? What would make this a good thing to do? I mean, I think even watching adults, I know you're probably a hockey guy, but like, what if we scored more goals in hockey, Kristen? I think it'd be kind of more fun to watch if we saw more goals in soccer, in hockey, in different kinds of sports, even at the adult level, right? So, like, why wouldn't we ask the children, what would make it more fun for you and more engaging, and get some even more creative ideas than what we've come up with so far? So I think some of these things, I mean, this notion has been around quite some time, and we've already made a lot of modifications. So why not make more?
One more thing I want to add, T-ball. T-ball sucks. Oh. Right, and I come from baseball, right? And that was probably the first thing that I look at when I started at baseball years ago. And I look at T-ball, and I've said, like, go figure why kids want to leave after this first experience in baseball. It's terrible. So I look at ways of doing things differently. And I look at martial arts. You know, martial arts, they have color belts, right? And I said, okay, we have hats. Why don't we have a color hat system? And we look at the main skills of our sport, which are throwing, running, receiving the ball, and we had 5 of them, and fundamental movement skills. And we look at 5 levels of color hats with 5 skills, and let's do it. Let's create an environment where kids will go through the color hats and will develop better skills. So I presented that for the first time to our stakeholders. I had dead silence in the room. Now they look at me like, what? Like, are you coming from another planet? Like, and one guy said, oh, I'm willing to try it. I said, okay, so I had a friend, and then we tried it, and year 2, we produced 50,000 hats. And then you look at the retention rate, it went from probably 20 to 60% retention rate. Kids wanted to come back because they had fun. We didn't eliminate the competition system, but created another vehicle to learn, and you mentioned earlier, the fun part, and being with friends also, and it brought us to another level.
I think it's really great, and I think the creativity is what we're interested in, right? The creativity around designing our competition structure based on where the kids are at. This is the core idea. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna pause for a minute. We're gonna pause our panel. I'm gonna ask you to have a conversation with a person near you. You can know them. Maybe I would love for you to introduce yourself to someone you don't know. And have an initial reaction to this. If you're looking for a question to answer, one question is, what is a rule modification that you've seen that has had a good effect? 2 minutes, go.
I mean, I think hockey is really a pioneer. I think they've done awesome. I do think it's good, like USDA, red ball, tennis, like it's a different ball, it's smaller rackets. They really started in on this, and they even
Another
now
thing for
got
T-ball is horrible, but there's
so they're
also
teaching
quick ball.
adults new to tennis how to play with the modified equipment as well.
There's many things to do it.
It's hard.
Same thing. I independently
It's
came
hard.
up
My
with
husband
this
did tennis
reading
though.
idea.
Yeah.
What I did is I wrote a book. And one of the problems with MSU studies is
Yeah.
there's 85 different versions of what people think is fun. And the problem is that
Yes, it is.
and what I did is look at the actual research and enjoyment,
Exactly.
which is done
Don't
by
you
my
do that in your league though? Don't you do smaller fields?
and basically explain that one in terms of soccer. Both my kids, one kid played for the Galaxy, one kid played for Chivas USA. And so I implemented programs that work, and much like you, I tried to get somebody to listen to my ideas.
And I know my
and
son
they
had a
said-
smaller ball, like smaller ball, smaller field, right?
and I built some programs that work, and I was like the yeah. I know you have to go there, but I wanted to talk to people.
This makes sense.
Do you want a water?
Oh, I do. Thank you. Is this? Did you drink out of this?
I think there's, yeah, he must have given you his.
Vince.
Oh. Yeah. No, he's hungry.
Vince. Did you drink out of this?
Oh, I gave you mine. Sorry.
Do you want one, Kyle? Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Let's come back, because I know you'll keep your conversation going the entire time. Andrew, right? Yeah. So Andrew's got a microphone. He's standing right in the middle. I'd love one volunteer to raise their hand and share. Okay, right here in the front, Andrew.
Good morning, everybody. So there's an interesting dynamic about changing the rules so that more kids are involved, or realizing that at any level it's about competition. People love to score. And how do you marry those two? So my question to you is, to what extent are we creating rules to compensate for the fact that our equipment is not kid-sized? Right? Because a kid who's playing sports with equipment that is proportionally sized to his or her size is able to do all those things that they will do as an adult, like score.
Does anyone want to answer that?
They're all pointing at me. So some sports already are doing this, right? So Kyle and I were just discussing soccer. When you're young and you're playing soccer, you do have a smaller ball, you do have a smaller field. In tennis, you have the red ball, you have a smaller racket, you have a smaller court. Those things are out there and happening. That doesn't mean that they are actually scoring more or that they're getting their shots even better. It means they're feeling a little bit more competent and are having a little bit more success, but you might have to still change a few things for them to really feel that success and to get that scoring to happen. So just the size of the equipment alone may or may not be doing it.
Again, in tennis, there's been a lot of research that has shown just the opposite, that when things are scaled intelligently, meaning everything is scaled, that kids are getting more, service in. They are volleying the ball more. They're hitting more punches. So they are able to do those things when the scaling is not, it's sort of haphazard. When it's intelligently decided that because this kid is that big, right, hands this big, here's the size racket for that player versus a little bit older player, and the ball, and the ball and so forth.
Yeah, so I'll comment on this because I think this is not an either or. This is a know your sport, pay attention to the experience of kids, pay attention to the way in which technique is developing. I have looked at some of the tennis work, right? And you're 100% right. In the context of the quality of the swing, a lower compression ball and a smaller racket creates an adult-like swing. I come from basketball, right? And from a basketball perspective, if you're a little 5-year-old shooting with an adult-sized ball, your technique is not adult-like, it's childlike. You're throwing the ball from your chest. So there's that piece. But even if you have a smaller size ball, anyone, who's basketball here? Raise your hand. Zone defense, okay? Like, let's think about zone defense rules. Let's think about if we allow people to play zone defense in youth basketball, you have 5 players sitting in the key, you can't drive to the basket, everyone's just shooting outside shots. They're not equipped or ready, and also defense is not learning how to play man-to-man. So it's a less engaging game. That's an opportunity for rule modification, right? So it's not an either-or. Yeah. We have one question in the back, and then we'll move to our next topic.
Thought you were asking for more modifications.
Sorry, say that again?
Were you asking for more modifications?
Oh, if you have an example of a modification that you'd like to share, that'd be great.
Sure. When the ball goes out of bounds, it always goes to the defense. That way we teach playing really hard and not being too worried about whether it touched you or not on the out, but you're playing really hard. You get the ball back.
Interesting. So in any sport? Which sports are you mainly thinking about?
I've used it in soccer and basketball.
What do you think?
Cool. Like I think, like to me, like when we look at the collective, just the people we have in the room here, we can come up with all kinds of cool things. Like just going back to the gentleman question earlier, like the system with the hat color, it's called rally cap. So in rally cap, if I'm skilled enough to hit from an adult throwing the ball, we'll do it. If you're not good enough and you need a T-ball, we'll do it. If you're even more advanced and you need a pitching machine, we'll do it. So it's not one way of doing things. It's depending on the kids that you have in front of you. So let's just be creative altogether.
Yeah. I'd like to transition topics to a really interesting piece of this, which is more on the structure side. So you look on that structure conversation, we're thinking about age groupings, we're thinking about selection. This is part of it, okay? And so we're gonna turn to Karin, because Karin is doing some really cool research with USA Hockey on a concept called biobanding. And raise your hand if you've heard of biobanding. Cool. This is cool. So Karin, take it away. What is biobanding? How does it work? What are you all doing?
Yeah, so in biobanding, the whole premise is naturally, a lot of us witness in youth sports, we have age group, and that's how we organize our competition, our teams, our competitions, etc. It's age group. Well, I think a lot of us have witnessed, even within an age group, say you could have 2 12-year-olds. One 12-year-old is ginormous. Another 12-year-old is pee-wee, right? And yet they're still playing against each other. They're the exact same age, and we've put them in a league together. So in some sports, where those bigger bodies can prevail, that's kind of challenging for the smaller individuals. And one of the notions is if we could group them together, and it's not just a size thing, it's a maturity status thing. So we have a means that's non-invasive where we can use an equation and measure height and weight and use parent height, and we can estimate how far they are away from kind of peak height velocity, essentially. So we're putting them together. We know if they're more an early mature, average mature, or a late mature. And you can do all kinds of things with that. You can just practice that way. You can have tournaments organized where you put teams together. But essentially now what you have done, you're still in the same age group. So, parents have a fit if they're playing up or down in age level, right? But this is a maturity thing. They're still the same age. So now you have a scenario where they're playing more along their size lines and they're kind of in a situation where they have a higher ability for success because they're with people that are more similar to their particular skill level and size. So you don't have to do everything in these groups, but you can at least provide some opportunities at tournaments, at practices, where they have this scenario. And what the research has shown is that children actually feel better. They have more fun when they are put in these maturity level groups together. So we're working with USA Hockey right now, and we're examining all kinds of facets of this. So not just how the kids feel about it, but how does it affect their performance? What does it look like from a fitness standpoint? And that's the fun part. Ken Martell from USA Hockey has access to the software that the NHL uses to look at on-ice statistics. So we can actually look at what is happening on the ice when children are grouped together in this way versus the traditional kinds of ways, and see how do the coaches think children are performing. You know, there's a whole notion about talent identification behind this as well. And sometimes coaches are just choosing the bigger kids because they're bigger and they can dominate. So we don't have all of our data yet, but we are diving into looking at this.
I think it's fascinating, and one of the questions that I have is around just the implementation. So I think in concept, yes, we're talking about relative age effect, right? And I don't know if folks have heard of that term, but relative age effect is the term that Karen's talking about of within age group age differences, right? There's someone who's born in the first 3 months of the year is going to be physically bigger than someone who's born, on average, than someone born later in the year. However, what do you think is the hardest thing to get for people to wrap their head around about actually like implementing this? Is it the kids? Is it the coaches? Is it parents? Like what are the obstacles that maybe USA Hockey has encountered in trying to make it work?
Yeah. So first, I'm just gonna, sorry Vince, give you a little minor correction,
Okay,
because relative age effect is not exactly the same thing. So relative age effect does have to do with the notion that children born earlier in the year may have those advantages, whereas biobanding is really more about the maturity status. So you could be born in January and still be like a late mature, right? So I just,
not exactly the
sorry,
same thing. That's okay. Thank you.
I couldn't help myself but to make that minor little correction. But so that relative age effect is definitely a thing that, and we're looking at that with the USA Hockey piece too, along with the biobanding. But I think I was talking to folks yesterday. Probably, and you know, the EPL has been doing this. This is happening in Europe. It's a thing with soccer. They have been running competitions and things over in the UK in this manner. And then some of that has transitioned into the US, where there have been some tournaments run this way with the biobanding. But I think a lot of people don't necessarily know how to do it, what the benefits would be, when, you know, so I think when we figure this out, we will have to, you know, kind of give some guidance about how to do this, because even for a coach to say, well, how do I know who's my early, average, late, mature? Well, now you got to plug into this equation and figure all that out. We're actually working on a website where people will be able to go in and enter the data, and it will spit back out to the coach. Here's who you put together, so that they won't have to think about that part. So it's those kind of things that I think just making it easier, more accessible to understand, like how you put them together, and then when and why you might do it. And they're, you know, depending on your competition level, and there are, you know, all kinds of caveats to that. So I think that's the hardest part, is figuring out how it works for each scenario. And, you know, the work that we're doing right now isn't going to answer all that. So we need to look at it in other settings, in other sports, and figure out, you know, what really works for each kind of scenario.
Yeah, I think it's, thank you for the correction and the insight. I think it's a really important one. I think we need to get the terms right. André, Eloisa, Kyle, what do you think about biobanding? How does it make you think about?
Well, I can speak specifically to what we're doing from an MLS Next perspective. You know, speaking to, you know, Karen's point around, you know, the way in which you can obviously measure these things and spits out an equation and gives you the answer as to whether or not, you know, this individual is a late developer, as an example. We have hundreds of these in MLS Next every year. We think it's a crucial part of development, obviously as we contemplate these individuals and their maturation and how they fit in, you know, to our broader landscape. And we're even implementing, you know, certain rules as it relates to late developers or overage players, and then contemplating that physical maturity into our rules and structure as well. So, you know, one thing that we did, you know, more recently this past year, is reduce the field size for the under 13 age group. So when you think about our technical team at MLS, our medical team working closely with the technical staff at the U.S. Soccer Federation, and as we think about kind of being thought leaders about how do we make that environment better for players, more enjoyable, but also develop more better players. Field size was something that we saw at the under 13 level through research, that we can enable individuals to have more interactions with the ball, to not see physical development be so overbearing over the results of the game, and really focus on the individual player's development at such a crucial age. So this is one example of something that we're doing that we really feel like has had a tangible positive effect on that specific age group and those players' development. I think as Vince alluded to earlier on, there are some practical things as it relates to even getting folks to understand what a late developer is, or how do you even set up a field if you're only set up for the traditional 11v11 field dimensions. These kind of practical details I think are crucially important as you think about implementation. Something that we ran into with the field dimension piece is that the goals are fixed on a lot of fields that you see out there in the landscape. And so how do groups work together to find out, can we transport goals every weekend? And how are we ultimately, right-sizing the competitive structures to produce the best outcomes for players? I think that's really, from a foundational level, what we start every discussion with when we think about trying to make MLS Next better, is how do we ultimately make it better for the player, make it better for development, and that's really kind of at the foundation of when we go down to discovery on should we change something, that's got to be at the foundation of all of it.
Kyle, I'd like for you to keep going, in part because you guys are thinking so deeply about these things, and you've done some stuff also around team standings and measurements of sort of success. I know that when we talk about youth sports, there's always this conversation of like, do away with the scoreboard, and then everyone freaks out about it, or do away with things. But you're thinking about some things really properly from a player development perspective that improve skill development, enjoyment, focus on skills. Can you talk a little bit more?
Yeah. So again, this is born out of the technical development team at the MLS League office in concert with constituents across the landscape, whether it be our partners in the technical side at US Soccer, or all the academy directors and chief soccer officers at all of our MLS clubs. We've done a series of work and a beta test over the last year with a partner we have called Taka. Taka takes the video from every single game that we have in MLS Next, 13,000 games over the course of a season, and scores every single individual action in every single game. So a run, a first touch, a pass, literally, it doesn't have to be on the ball, it can be off the ball. And so, through that work and analyzing everything that was happening during the course of the game, we could see, okay, the under 13s with this new field dimensions, that game's improving. We're seeing the players tangibly improve. But really, what else, where else could we take this? Speaking a little bit to Andre's point around, the coaches are going to coach to the structure. We know the competitive dynamics, especially at Next, at the highest level, where winning matters, right? A lot of times it's that individual coach's job. That's how they're viewed in the scope of the landscape or that particular club is how are their results? Are they winning games? And so to change that paradigm, again, in concert with all these constituents and partners across our landscape and with our partners in Taka, we are rethinking how we rank teams within the under 13 and under 14 age groups. So we did away with standings. They're no longer on our website at the 13s and 14s level. Got some phone calls, got some emails, as you can imagine. But really at the crux of this, it's about trying to understand, how do we produce more better players? How do we work with our clubs, with the coaches at those clubs, with parents and players to understand how do we produce those more better players? And we do believe, by the way, that there has to be a pathway at some point, and our technical team would tell you this, to how do we win games as well. That there is importance in that, but there is a right time to focus on that. So that'll be the new, there's more to come on this, with kind of a full kind of brand launch of what this will be called, and sort of how the teams will be ranked through the remainder of this season, now culminating where we'll have teams invited to our season-ending MLS Next Cup based on their rankings from the season in terms of the quality of their play as opposed to the actual results. So a little bit more about kind of how we're thinking about things.
I love it. Andre, what do you think about the elimination of standings, traditional standings, and creating a new, whatever it is, metric for actually, evaluating or representing how a team or group played?
Yeah, I love it. And I think it goes along the way of changing the scoring system as well. Kids are not stupid. Like when they play soccer or hockey, they know who's going to be winning. Even if you get rid of the scoring board or whatever, they count. They go to school, they count. They know how to count, so they're not stupid. But if we change the way we score the games, it brings another layer of competencies, of skills, of behaviors of coaches as well that will make a difference. So I'm a big supporter of changing the way we do things and not being afraid of changing those things and try them out.
I want to open up for maybe a couple of questions, just again to kind of make it as interactive as possible. So Andrew, I'm going to make you run around. We'll start over here on the far right in green. Yeah.
Thanks for the conversation. This is really interesting. I have probably more questions than we have time for, but I wanted to go back to biobanding, and I'm really curious if there's any discussion about how this impacts the inclusion of trans athletes in sport. I'm a transgender person and have been in sport all my life, and I also am a community developer in soccer and developed a club in Portland where we didn't do any gendered teams. Everybody's playing together, and I didn't know about biobanding until now, but we've been doing that essentially. We've been putting players on teams based on what's your skill level, how competitive are you, how competitive do you want to be, and your age, roughly, maybe give or take a year or two. And kids of all genders, we have some transgender, some non-binary youth playing together. They are all playing together at all ages, from 6 years old all the way up to our high school age. Everybody's doing great. Everybody's healthy. Nobody's gotten hurt. And there's so much going on for kids in that age to be able to play together that they're unlearning gender stereotypes, and there's just so much to happen. So when you're talking about biobanding, this is exactly where I've been in trying to get people to understand that trans inclusion in sport is not about, are you a boy or a girl, what is on your birth certificate? It's about what kind of athlete are you? And there are so many variations of athleticism in our sports, in our bodies, and this biobanding idea is exactly what's needed to create inclusion. Has there been conversation about it?
I love that question.
I was just reminded to say who I am. I'm Cage Leitner, and I'm from Portland, Oregon, with a number of organizations.
Thanks, Cage.
Yeah, Cage, I've heard you speak before, and I love what you're doing. It's amazing. And no, the short answer is there hasn't been a lot of discussion about that. But the way that you are doing what you're doing essentially does take the spirit of that into account. So do you have to do biobanding per se? Not necessarily. If you have a system that essentially does the same thing, that's fantastic. That's exactly what we're talking about here. It doesn't have to be pigeonholed into exactly this or exactly that. And like I said, I just really admire the work that you've been doing, and I think that's a great way to go about it too. So that's tough in the biobanding space because you do have sex-based equations that would make that more of a challenge to incorporate trans athletes. So I do think we need to be thinking about that, and I do really appreciate your approach, and it's a similar approach that could be used instead.
Eloisa, I kind of feel like maybe this might be a time to talk about the varsity league because you have mixed gender groupings, right? And the construction of the varsity league as a sort of space where the goal is retention, more than it is athlete development. Can you talk about just like the structure of that? We'll come back to a few more questions, but I do want to create an opportunity for Eloisa.
Thank you, Vince. So at San Francisco Youth Soccer, we have a varsity league. It's relatively new. We tried to start it up years ago, and it was basically a pickup league. Park and Rec gave us a free field to use, and we didn't necessarily get many kids to come and play, and this is at the high school level. And recently, we now have like over 200 kids participating in the spring on both the boys and the girls divisions. And it's our recreational pathway. So for any player in the league, we have a recreational pathway from 2nd grade all the way up to 12th grade. We know for athletes that when they're in high school, they have so many choices of activities to be involved with, whether it's the school sport of the season, whether or not they play on a club team. They might have a musical, a drama, the Model UN, and most recently with one of the varsity team members, he had to go to a family, because he's Dutch, went to the Dutch Tulip Festival, so wasn't able to go to his game this week. So we offer the flexibility in the league to meet the kids where they are. The game times are within a 3-hour span on the same day, on Saturdays, at the same location. So there is predictability in terms of their schedule. And then in terms of affordability, we charge $110 per season, so for the fall or for the spring. So they get anywhere from 8 to 10 games. They get 2 practices a week, and then their team, they might have an independent coach, they might have a volunteer coach, or they might even have, on the girls' side, we have 2 club teams that have submitted varsity teams. So it's just a great, and on our varsity boys' side, we have 2 teams that are consistent of referees, like youth referees that give back on the weekends and referee games for our league. So we have that affordability. And then in terms of accessibility, it's just we have kids that have done the travel through middle school, 9th and 10th grade, and they just really miss soccer and they really want to play. So they know that they can come back and join a rec league, our rec league for high schoolers. And continue to play and continue to give back.
And just as a reminder, so you've done a small-sided version, and the rosters. Can you just talk about the size of the teams on the field, but also the size of the rosters, which is also an interesting thing you're doing?
Yeah. In terms of our rosters, we have minimums that we need to make because we do work with our Park and Rec in terms of what teams can actually register in the league. But with the high school team, we're allowed to have up to 20 players on the team, and it's an 8v8 on a half pitch. So, if we don't have a lot of players that are available, even though we have a max roster of 20, we do allow guest play as long as they're registered with the league on another team. So, we always have consistent games. There are rarely any forfeits, at the varsity level. And it's just great to see players just continuing to play. We just had a recent inquiry this past weekend even. My son loves soccer. They only offer it at his school during the winter. And I'd love to find a place for him to play.
One more question for you, because I think that one of the things that's unique about this, right, is so you're looking at high school students who may or may not be on their school team. I mean, they probably are, but even then it's fall and spring, so it doesn't clash. But you tried to do just sort of an open run. And it was sort of like we booked the space, we let kids go. And why do you think that didn't land? And what is it about this? Because there's a certain, this to me feels like a concept of the minimum effective dose of structure. We're gonna create the minimum amount of structure that we need for them to get the experience that they want without over-structuring, right? Because we want them to have fun, we want them to enjoy, we want them to play. We wouldn't want to over-structure in this context for this population. What was it about the open run that didn't work, and what makes it, what do you think is making this work?
Yeah, so in terms of just having the regular pickup, even though it was on the same day and time, when we originally started with the concept, sometimes kids would come, sometimes no one would come, so if they would come a couple of weeks and there weren't enough players, because there wasn't really a commitment, That's really why the pickup, like on the weekends, didn't work. And we did have to provide structure by having adults organize teams, and to also get above the number. Like it's not going to work if you only have 2 teams registered in the division. And now that we have 4 to 5 teams, and just rotating, playing each other over the season, it's just been great. We've even with the spring session, we've had a new community organization come in, Soccer Without Borders, and submit 2 teams to play. So and then we have another So I think by involving the community and working with the infrastructure in place, like with clubs and with some of the independent coaches, it has definitely worked.
It's super cool. You should check out their website. They've got a whole breakdown of the varsity program on the SFYS website. I want to open up to a few more questions. I know a few folks had questions. So against the wall here in blue. Sorry, we're going to make Andrew do a nice little sprint.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Arminio from Northwestern. One question I have for André. So you mentioned that you changed the rules in that example you gave earlier, and then all the kids, like 60% of them came back. So what about the process during a season? So because I'm just the outcome, like having them come back, it might be something, that they might change schools or they might change programs, they might move away. So how about the process? What are some things that we can look at when we do such changes to say, okay, this is working and they're enjoying, or,
So if I go back to my premise earlier, so the T-ball thing was such a bad thing that they were leaving to play soccer or other sports. By changing how we structure their first experience in our sport, which I believe is the most important one, the most critical one. If the first experience is a positive one, with good coaching, good programs, we say the 3P, good people, good program, good places, it is going to work. That being said, I had challenges at the beginning saying, okay, what do we do if we have 3 kids with white hats and 2 kids with blue hats and 5 kids with red and everything? How are we going to do this? And my answer was, well, it's working in judo and they're all training together, so why not us? So there was some noise at the beginning about that, the differences in the same group, but that lasted a year. And after that, they saw the results. And they wanted to come back. And this program is a beginning program in baseball, so we're looking at 5 to 7-ish. And those are the metrics. And we had also statistics about number of ball touches, which was 20 times more than T-ball. So we did our research on those metrics that are important to sell it to parents and other stakeholders. And after that, we had a national sponsor and everything fall into place.
And here in the front.
While we're waiting, I'd say you can also ask the kids.
Hi, my name is André Hines from Packer Collegiate in Brooklyn. I really love everything that y'all have shared so far. The question that I have is, this seems really applicable to younger student athletes, younger groups. What has been seen as these children kind of get older and go into the varsity level sports? Because I also teach physical education, and this seems like the perfect sort of teaching tool to get kids familiar with the sport, get them comfortable with proper ball size, hoop size, goal size. How has this transitioned, or what have you seen with the transition for kids as they get older and then they go into like a more competitive space where the rules are kind of like set?
I can go.
Jump in.
One thing that we've noticed, like lots of kids are leaving sports between like 12, 15 age group. Everywhere in the world is the same thing. What we're starting to see now is that if you decide to quit sport, but you're interested in going to another sport at that age, it's almost impossible because you don't have the skills. So many organizations now, many other countries are looking for how can we serve those individuals that don't like basketball anymore, they want to go to volleyball, but they've never got the skills because they were not a multi-sport athlete, and they want to go there and continue their progress there. So they're looking at ways to do that. Is it simple to do? Probably not. But we're starting to realize that it's something that we need to look at.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some evidence already from some of the sports that the skills are transferring, and that the competence that the athletes are feeling carries them through. But I think that also gets into this notion about the single sport, reminding us that we need to encourage a variety of sports for participation, and maybe, you know, there are a few sports where you kind of need to specialize really early. But aside from those, encouraging that sampling approach is going to be beneficial, because then they will have the skills developed to jump to another sport. And if we make it more fun and they're having a good time in a multitude of sports, then that also helps them kind of figure out what do they like best, what are they enjoying best. So I don't know that we have a ton of data that really would substantiate this notion that what we're doing here is great down the road. I think we need to get that for sure. So it's a really good question. But I think those are some of the other things that we need to think about as well.
Yeah, I was just going to make the point that for our recreational program, MLS Go, from an age perspective, we were very intentional in that. Obviously, when you think about rec soccer, it's, you know, your core kind of 6 to 10 years old, right? You know, maybe 7 to 11. You know, MLS Go goes all the way up through 14. And speaking to the retention point that I think a lot of the other panelists mentioned, with soccer more specifically, series of research that we did and others, you know, across the landscape over the last few years found that retention used to be around the age of 14 in terms of kind of the peak age that you saw dropout happen. It's now under 12, headed, I think, towards 11. Or maybe it is 11 now. So when you think about that, like year over year, that's significant, and we wanted to make sure that we had that opportunity for kids to transition. We're not necessarily playing from an MLS perspective in that space that's maybe the 14 to 18 at the rec level. There are lots of programs out there that are, and we wanted to make sure we could provide that bridge should kids want to go on and continue their recreational play at the high school ages.
I want to answer the question as well, because so I actually think, so I agree that if you're looking at modifications from like an equipment perspective or field size, you're probably thinking younger kids benefit. I think rule changes are happening all the time at much older levels. And I'll give you a couple examples. We've seen Major League Baseball institute a pitch clock, right, which has sped up the game. When the game gets faster, there's more opportunities to play. It's a more engaging game. It's a more exciting game. I think we are having this debate all the time in basketball about the shot clock. You know, college remains, you know, behind the NBA and FIBA. Many high schools have not adopted a 24, or many high school states still don't have a shot clock. Others have an older one. Pace of play is a way of modifying games to increase athlete involvement. That's just a way, and physical activity. If it's a faster game, so you're playing, you have more exchanges. There's more athlete ownership because there's fewer opportunities for coaches to actively manipulate what's going on. So more athlete ownership of play, which I think is also conducive. So you have those examples, and then I just think in general, you know, anything. One of the things I think would be interesting is continuing to play with roster construction. Particularly, I'm a little bit of a radical. Like, do our rosters have to be set from the start of the season all the way to the end? Can we play more with mixing up rosters mid-season or during the course of the season, or even creating structures where people show up and it's a new team every time? Mixing up roles, you know, I might be locked in a role on this team, but if I play in the new group, then I'm in a different role. So I think stuff like that. We have time for a few more questions. Yeah.
Thanks. My name's Graham. I run a grassroots soccer program in Philadelphia. This is brilliant. I love all of this. Thank you. I wanted to actually answer that question. We do exactly that. And it kind of combines a couple of the ideas that this is a lot of work, don't get me wrong, but we make new rosters for the kids who can make it each Saturday when they come. And a lot of this boils down to parent education, getting buy-in, being really clear up front with how you're running things so that, to some of the examples that were offered earlier, if someone has grandma's birthday, they're going to miss the game. It is what it is. And this grew out of the idea of not putting too much pressure on our volunteer coaches to make every single game, but also found the idea that, if you took 2 kids with you, they were forfeiting games a la San Francisco. It's a lot of work, but yeah, I think that's a rule change that we also found sort of unacademically. We didn't do a study, but there were a lot less temper tantrums after the game. You didn't lose the 12 kids who didn't win a game all season. But you also knew if someone scored a hat trick on you, the chances are you could be on their team next week, so you didn't kind of freak out. Sorry, I forget your name, but about MLS, the idea of being in the soccer world, I love your point. I'm sorry, this isn't a question, maybe it is, about metricizing the game, whatever the software you're using was. What I find really interesting about that is that we often take for granted that kids' sports should mirror adult sports, and really the adult sport requires so much different skills that are built into that youth space that you have to master. And I think in soccer, the one is having a relationship with that ball that you put it 60 yards on a dime. That's how you win a game, but that is not what youth can do, and it's not how you build. The way you build that relationship is with all the touches. So I'd be very interested in following a little bit of that about how you will score games on these sort of hidden metrics that aren't goal-based.
Yeah. We could definitely have a deep discussion about all of that. I actually want to speak more specifically. This is going to go away from like elite development for a second and speak specifically about MLS Go, our recreational program, because we developed a curriculum. It's called the MLS Go Playbook when we launched Go. And again, working in concert with a lot of the technical leaders across the landscape and those at MLS, that playbook, as we call it, is not obviously just one size fits all. It's different for every age. And so there's 12 chapters, and that at each age you're experiencing different things, not just from a technical development perspective, but physiologically as well, mentally as well, because we want the individual coaches to be able to right size the feedback in the direction based on obviously that age. So to your exact point, that's the level of depth. We just didn't want to do like the sort of here's rec soccer by MLS. It's like, no, let's actually provide some guidance for a coach, because to your point, the 7-year-old and the 12-year-old can't kick the ball the same distance. What vision is on a field to those 2 different ages is going to feel and look very different in terms of that instruction. So I just think your point is I think spot on, and that's exactly how we're trying to get that level of depth to provide people with the goods to actually be able to communicate with the age in the right way.
I'll maybe ask the last question then of the group. What would be your advice to folks who are sort of pondering some kind of structural change? Let's leave them with some kind of inspiring comment.
I can start on this one. I like, in Canada, we have kilometers, we don't have miles. So we call it the kilometer zero. So kilometer zero is your guiding principles for each stages of development. So it's a bit of work, but if you take that step back and reflect on what's needed for the kids at each of your stages of development based on your ADM, and come up with those guiding principles, those will be the driving force of all the changes that you want to do. And when you're not sure about something, you can always refer back on your guiding principles and make those proper decisions. And I've seen too many organizations shooting everywhere, trying to make all kinds of different changes without having something solid with a good base in order to attach those changes in competition. So that would be my recommendation. And if you're looking for guidance on that, you can find me. I have so much stuff that I can share with you, like through email, whatever. So I'll be willing to do that. Yeah.
You haven't even talked about Cirque du Soleil, which I know.
I thought you were doing contortion or something.
No. But ask him about Cirque. He's doing amazing stuff on athlete confidence.
On the confidence side, yeah.
For us, it's definitely like listen to your community, and make sure you have that feedback model built in, whether it's through surveys, emails, phone calls. And I think one of the recent questions that came up for us was our mercy rule, when there's the goal differential of 5-0. It was usually like, let's take a player off the field. And, would the teams and the players, they weren't learning anything, you know. So one of the coaches suggested, we haven't implemented this yet, but said, could we do penalty kicks? You know, this is for the second and third graders, like just as a way to introduce them to more things about the game, you know. So just be open, you know. So I'm looking forward to seeing what our community has to say in terms of feedback for how we handle this in the future.
I just want to bring it back around to long-term athlete development and the American development model and remind us that, yes, we have elite sport. It's great. There are tons of opportunities. People are engaging. There are a lot more who are being left behind and who aren't playing sports anymore. And I would like to see us do a lot more for them. I still play basketball at age 50 plus. Love it. Don't want to quit for a very long time. I want to see a bunch of me's running around in whatever sport they want to play. So to me, it just comes back to that. What are the things we need to do? We need to be thinking about it in this way because there are a lot more kids that aren't into that elite sport pathway. And elite sport's great. It's like, that's awesome. I love it. I love watching it. I love everything about that too. But what about this whole huge population that we're not really thinking about? I want to bring it back around to keeping people in sport for a lifetime.
Yeah, I think that's all really well said. I don't know that I have a ton to add, but I think just from a next and go perspective, we try to be grounded. I think André just mentioned it, but grounded in what are the mission and objectives of our program, and whatever decisions that we're even exploring, that they have to go back to that. And unequivocally, moving us forward, if we have the data and we've got the buy-in and ultimately we've got the solution for how to implement it, is a good thing. And we should be ambitious about trying to take those steps forward, even if there was a certain way that it's always been done, maybe over a certain period of time. So,
yeah, I think it's fantastic. My point would be, you don't have to boil the ocean. Like, start small. Find a little space where you have some degree, we call it where it's safe to fail. Find a place where it's safe to fail, try stuff, get some working models, and then expand out from there. I think anytime you're trying to introduce something new that's gonna challenge thinking, build your evidence in a place where no one's gonna scream at you, and you can then show them that it is working. So anyway, round of applause for our panel. So just a couple reminders in the app. So two things to note. Hopefully you've added this session in the app, because if you've added it in the app, you'll be able to complete the survey that we have. So there's a little short, if you add this to your calendar in the app, at the bottom, there's a thing asking you to take the survey. It takes 2 minutes. It would really help us with some feedback. It's like 3 questions. It's very short. The other thing is we have some companion material in the app. So there's you can get the link to the ADM. You get some information on that paper, and also there's a book literally called Redesigning Sport that's built on, that gives all these examples of how this is done. This is John McCarthy out of the University of Boston. He's really good. So there's a book all around how to do this stuff in practice. So thanks everyone. Appreciate you taking some time today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.